Hello and thanks for visiting our website, rebuilderindabox.com. Today we're going to learn how to rebuild the 10SI alternator. The 10SI is known for three basic positions, and they're in reference to the dual plug, which is the voltage regulator. For example, on this alternator, the threaded ear, the adjusting ear, is straight up at 12 o'clock, and the bottom pivot ear is at 6 o'clock. The voltage regulator is at 12 o'clock. So that's called straight up or 12 o'clock position. On this one, when the threaded ear, the adjusting ear is straight up, and the pivoting ear, the elongated ear, is down at 6 o'clock. The voltage regulator is off to the right, 3 o'clock. And on this one, when the threaded ear is straight up, the voltage regulator plug-in position is off to the left, which is considered 9 o'clock. So what we have here is two 10SIs and a 12SI. You can see the 12SI is a little bit different, the way the rectifier is mounted in, but other than that they're extremely similar in the way the parts are constructed together. The 10SI was very popular in the 37 and the 63 amp versions, and the 12SI came in a 37, a 66, and very popular 78 amp. Also, many of the 12SIs, unlike this one, have a plastic turbine type fan that was stock. So let's start taking one apart. Here you see the 5/16 bolt that's holding it together. There's 4 of them on all 4 corners. Take those out. Take a magic marker or a piece of paint or something to scratch it with and put a mark across the side so you can get it back together in the same position that you took it apart at. We're going to use a 1/2-inch impact gun with a 15/16 socket and a rag. Put the rag around the pulley. Hold on to it with one hand and take the pulley nut off. Then we remove the pulley nut, the lock washer, the pulley comes off. Sometimes these are in 2 pieces, a spacer and a hollow pulley. Take the fan off, and there's a spacer right here that we need to take off and get it out of the way. Then we're going to take a hammer and hold on to the back plate and the stator winding, the metal part in the middle, with your fingers, and tap off the front half. If the rotor comes with it, that's okay. Looking down into the back of the alternator, looking down inside it, here's the major components. This is the stator winding, radio noise suppressor, capacitor, diode trio, rectifier, or 6 diodes are, brush holder assembly, voltage regulator. What we're going to do is take the 3 11/32 nuts off next, and you can see this brush springs right there. Reach in and get those out of the way so they don't get tangled up in something that they shouldn't be. Taking the stator out of the housing, take your fingers and stick them underneath, holding the stator down inside, and with a hammer tap on the outer edges of the back plate. And basically what we're going to do at this point is just go ahead and unbolt everything. You can see the 2 1/4-inch heads here, the 1/4-inch. There's 3 bolts, screws that hold down the voltage regulator brush holder assembly. 2 of them are insulated. This one over here is a ground, and there's a ground tab underneath that on the voltage regulator. Also the 7/16 battery stud, take that off too. We're going to go ahead and take the front plate and the bearing off the shaft, and underneath here you'll see the 3 screws holding the bearing in. These are 5/16 usually. Take the 3 screws out and the bearing cover off. And here we're taking a look at the parts that it's time to do cosmetic on, if you plan on doing any cosmetic. If you want to just wash it in solvents, don't use any kind of gasoline. This is the back plate, the front plate, the pulley, and the fan. Have it bead blasted, chromed, polished, just paint it, whatever you want to do, but leave the old bearings in it at this point, because especially if you have it chromed, you don't want any chrome getting down inside the outside race where the bearing won't press fit in again. Same thing with this one. Just leave the old bearing in there and bead blast it first, so that you remove the old bearing after the bead blasting's done, and then put the new bearing in. Also, the rotor is ready to be painted, either with some varnish or just regular paint, and then run some sandpaper or Scotch-Brite over the slip rings, the shaft where the needle bearing goes, and the shaft where the drive-in bearing goes, for ease of assembly. Right at this point, if you wanted to do an ohm meter check, you could check for continuity from slip ring to slip ring. This is one big long wire and a coil going from point A to point B. So clean that up with some Scotch-Brite or sandpaper, and when you clean this up with the Scotch-Brite, take very careful notice that there are no pits or grooves or little tiny gouges in this part of the shaft, because that is a physical contact with the needle bearing itself, and if there's any pits in there, it ruins the new needle bearing. This is the stator. You want to visually inspect it as close as you possibly can. Check all the coils, all of the windings for any signs of heat or any signs of anything melting, varnish melting out. If you want to use an ohm meter, you can check for continuity among all 3. They will all have continuity to each other, but none of them will have continuity to anything that's considered ground, the metal part. Next, what we did was we took some black tape and wrapped the stator leads. You'll notice that the black tape is wrapped clear down almost to the end of the eyelet itself, so that the metal part of the leg of the eyelet is wrapped in black tape. We recommend Scotch 88T or Super 88 3M black tape products for the automotive industry. A lot of generic black tapes are just simply not going to be usable. Here are the two insulated voltage regulator hold down screws, and we want to change the insulators on there so that you have new insulation, and we're going to show you an easy way to get that insulator off. Lay it on a flat metal surface like on the back of the vise, in that position right there. Tap down on it with a hammer gently. Roll it around, tap it down a little bit. Then it can be scooted down. Then lay it in that position there and tap on the widest part. Then you can thread it off. Let's take a look now at the brush holder assembly and the 3 hold down screws. You can see we've replaced the insulators on the two. On the middle one here, the ground screw, we meticulously buffed up underneath the head and the surface area of this particular screw, because that has to come in contact with the ground tab, and that's a very important connection. It's a low voltage connection, but it's the source of corrosion and various pollutants. We want to take a small amount of either dielectric or white lithium grease and put on this ground tab both sides. Just rub a very thin layer of it and a very thin amount of white lithium or dielectric grease on the underside of the head of this bolt. These are like 2 extra insulators that we provide as an extra added caution, because the plastics that these are made out of a lot of times is imported. Put an extra insulator on each one of these just to give some extra protection against anything that would cut through as you're tightening down those bolts. Looking a little bit closer at the plastic brush holder, you'll see the area that's highlighted in red. That's actually a divot that accommodates the new brush when you install it. Also, you'll find one exactly the opposite place on the other side for the other brush. Likewise, here's the new brushes, and you can see the red portions where we put a little dab of red paint on them. Those are the extrusions that go down into the divots on the plastic brush holder. So what we're going to do is just hold it like that. There's the first brush. Flip it over. Put the second brush on. And you'll see how they kind of fit down into there. After you put the springs in. 2 common household items you need to load the springs underneath the brushes. One is a straightened out paper clip, and then your common ordinary Bic pen. Take the first spring, put it in the hole, chase it down in there. Hold it with the pen while you stick the straightened out paper clip in the side. Then do the same thing on the other side. Push the paper clip all the way through, and the brushes are spring loaded. Installing the new bearings can be made very simple with an oven and a freezer. Put the new needle bearing in the freezer for about an hour. Put the back plate in an oven. Cook it at 400 degrees even 350 for about 20 minutes, and the bearing will just drop right in. Then when it cools, everything will be set. You want to leave a little bit sticking out on the needle bearing so that the back of the shaft can't rub against the metal backing on the needle bearing. Same way with the drive-in bearing. Put the roller bearing in the freezer for about a half an hour to an hour and heat the plate up in an oven for about 20 minutes. The bearing will drop right in, and then you can put the cover, after it cools down, put the cover and the 3 retainer bolts back together. Now we're ready to put the drive-in assembly back together. This collar right here, on some aftermarkets, it'll come off. On the original versions, it's part of the shaft, so you don't have to worry about it. Just make sure that it is on there. Then we have to push this on. Spacer, fan, pulley. Same deal with this. This collar right here on a lot of pulleys is a separate piece. This is a one piece. Just make sure that it's there. Lock washer, pulley nut. And tighten that up pretty much the opposite of the way you took it off. Hold on to this with a rag. 5/16 socket with a 1/2 inch impact. I'm sorry, I think I said 5/16 socket, it's a 15/16 socket. Here's the remaining components that we're going to finish installing. We have radio noise suppressor, capacitor, trio, voltage regulator, rectifier, which contains the 6 diodes. After the needle bearing's been installed, we're ready to start putting components back in. Lay the rectifier inside the housing, like this. Put the new insulator on the battery post stud. And then hold that in there with your finger, turn it over, put the battery post stud through, put the 7/16 nut on there, and put the ground screw in. Now these have to be tight. These are, if they're loose at all, they're going to arc and cause you problems and heat up. So put these 2 bolts in, and on a 12 SI there'll be 3 of them. There'll be 2 grounds, one here and one there, holding the ground side of the rectifier down. But put these bolts in and then double check to make sure that they're nice and tight. Next step would be to put the radio noise suppressor capacitor back in, bolting it down here and here. Then we're going to lay the voltage regulator in place. Then we're going to lay the brush holder assembly on top of the regulator, and the straightened out paper clip is going to go down through the hole in the back plate. You'll see the 2 line-up pins coming through the center. Then we're going to lay the trio on top of that. Next step is to install the 3 voltage regulator hold down screws, the 2 insulated ones and the ground one. And what we want to do is just take this point right here and double check all our work to make sure that all the screws are tight. So there's 7 of them that just go back over everything and make sure everything's tight before we put the stator in. Put the stator back in, and you'll notice that the stator has notches that line up with the holes in the housing. There's 4 notches in the stator. Put the 3 leads on and push it down in there, and then line these. You can take a hammer and tap on this knob right here on the top of it or bottom of it while you're holding on to the stator to line up the notches in the stator to accommodate the holes in the housing. Put your 3 11/32, put your 3 8/32 nuts on there with the 11/32 socket and tighten them down, and you're ready to put it together. So what we're going to do is put the bottom half, the front, on the bottom, set it in the vise, find our mark that we placed on the side, set it on there, and then just take both hands and kind of push it down. Line up the holes, put the 4 bolts in and tighten them down. Then the last thing you do is remove the brush pin. And as you pull this pin out, you should be able to hear the brushes click down into place. And so we're done. If the alternator is labor intensive to install, we would recommend taking it to your local parts store to have it tested. However, sometimes the people that work at these places are kind of unfamiliar with what's going on with their test equipment, so we'd like to take a couple minutes and just show you a little bit about amp and voltmeters and how the hookups are. 3 places that need juice on the 10 SI. The battery post, of course, is hot all the time. This goes straight to the battery with at least a number 10 wire, because that's the one that carries all the amperage. It will normally, on trucks, it'll go to a junction block. On cars, it'll go down to the starter post, first to go through fuse link wire. And the 2 plug-ins, you'll notice number 1 and number 2. Sometimes there'll be an R underneath number 1 and an F underneath number 2. Number 1 is the one that goes to the idiot light. You should be able to stick a test light in your plug and turn the ignition switch on and off, and your test light will go on and off on the number 1 terminal. Number 2 also is normally number 10 wire, and it's hot all the time as well. That's where the voltage regulator senses voltage at. The number 1 terminal basically turns the alternator on and off. But the number 2, sometimes you'll even see it come just straight down to the battery post, depending on the different vehicles that it's installed on. Basically what we're interested in when we test an alternator, of course, is amps and volts. On these 2 meters here, voltage would be on the left and amperage is on the right. The alternator is not spinning right now, so naturally there's no amperage output, and 12 to the battery, so that the voltage regulator thinks that the voltage is going down and applies more amps. So while we're loading, the voltage reading should be ignored. When there's a load being applied, you don't read the voltage. We already did a test run and we saw that the voltage was 14 to 15, so that's okay. Now we're going to check the full amperage output. And And so if you take your alternator to the parts store and you can get roughly a test equivalent to this, you can consider it ready to install.